we've finished drilling. What's the first thing we need to do after finishing drilling? We need to switch the implant motor settings from drilling mode to insertion mode and set the implant insertion program on the implant motor. The speed should be around 30. The torque should be around 30 to 40 Newton centimeters. The rotation direction must be forward, and here as well, irrigation is not necessary. I recommend that for first act cases in the anterior regions, and generally in first act cases, since achieving primary stability is harder than usual, you should at least use fixtures that are more tapered. They are more conical, they are more triangular. Usually, with a bit of under-drilling using these fixtures and these systems, you can achieve more predictable primary stability. For every surgery, it's a bummer when you follow the drilling sequence exactly as recommended by the manufacturer and you get poor primary stability. It doesn't have good insertion. You can't do a one-stage procedure. You have to use a cover screw. These are good outcomes. So I recommend in cases where soft bone, D3 or D4, or in the maxilla when working with a simultaneous sinus lift, as we're discussing. In the anterior maxilla, use more tapered fixtures because achieving primary stability with them is more predictable. Drilling is done. I've opened the fixture. As mentioned, use a more tapered fixture, and I've picked up the fixture with the driver. It's better to start implant insertion using the handpiece and driver. Since my drilling was right up against the palatal side and was palatally positioned, I'll guide the implant insertion right up against the palatal wall. I completed the initial insertion of the fixture. As you can see, my fixture is right up against the palatal side. If at this stage you notice there's a bit of a gap on the buccal side, or a bit of a gap on the palatal side, or if you see that all the gap is on the palatal side at this stage, you've completely gone the wrong way. Remove the fixture. At this stage, you've only done your job correctly if all the gap is on the buccal side. That's exactly what you're seeing in the image. This means, in terms of buccolingual and mesiodistal positioning, the placement is correct. Now, the only thing left is to determine and adjust the vertical depth and how deep the implant sits in the bone. Now, pay attention to the angle of the implant placement. See, it's exactly parallel to the mid-sagittal axis. It's not even slightly mesial or distal. This means we're perfect in mesiodistal positioning. As you saw in the previous image, in buccolingual positioning, we're up against the palatal side. Buccopalatal positioning is in the right spot. The only thing left is to adjust the vertical position. Many drivers have gauges on them, and some have color codes that indicate the depth at which the fixture is placed. On this system, the dentist can also see several color codes on the driver. For example, the first line below shows the number 1. Above it, it shows the number 2. The higher line below and above it shows the numbers 3 and 4 millimeters. Where is the correct position and depth for placing the implant? When your implant is 3 to 4 millimeters away from the free gingival margin. As I mentioned, if you've done a full flap and no longer have the free gingiva in its physiological state, this index will roughly correspond to your implant being about 2 millimeters below the crest of healthy bone. So, I continue with a careful insertion of the dental implant, utilizing this specialized ratchet instrument and also by hand, applying precise control until my implant is positioned exactly 4 millimeters away from the free gingival margin. At the end of the implant insertion, the number shown by the gauge on the ratchet indicates how much primary stability and insertion torque you have. If this number is above 25 Newton centimeters, it means the primary stability is very good. It means your insertion torque is very high, and you are allowed to use a healing abutment and perform a one-stage surgery. But if not, if this number was lower, if it was below 20 Newton centimeters, here you shouldn't take any risks and should use a cover screw so that chewing forces during the osseointegration period don't put pressure on the fixture and don't jeopardize the integration of your fixture. So, this final number during implant insertion is very important because it helps you decide whether the implant surgery should be one stage or two stage. In addition to the fact that 20 to 25 Newton centimeters is a reliable cutoff for deciding whether to use a healing abutment or a cover screw. Now, with this new trend regarding immediate load and immediate temporary prosthesis, you definitely need a minimum insertion torque of 30 to 35 Newton centimeters. So again, this number is extremely important. In the occlusal view, you can see that the implant is completely separated from the buccal surface. This gap between the implant and the buccal surface must be completely filled with bone material. The old concept said that if this gap was small, don't use bone material, don't do gap grafting. If it was large, then at that point, do gap grafting. But now, given the sensitivity regarding implants in the aesthetic and anterior region, I have to tell you that you absolutely must perform gap grafting in this space between the implant and the buccal wall. If the socket is intact like this, that's good, all the walls are healthy. Maybe a simple allograft can provide you with a suitable gap graft at minimal cost and with high predictability. We carefully place our bone graft material not only between the dental fixture and the surrounding bony wall, but also even as a supportive structure behind the free gingival margin. So don't just perform a gap graft in the intravenous areas, but also add additional bone material on top of it to adequately support the free gingival margin so that the free margin doesn't collapse and can effectively maintain its optimal projection in the aesthetic zone. In the buccal view, as you can clearly see, the occlusobuccal depth of the implant placement relative to the gingival margin is approximately 3 to 4 millimeters. If soft tissue thickness is 1 to 2 millimeters, your implant should be positioned 2 millimeters more apically relative to the palatal bone crest. So in the end, the surface of my implant will be 2 millimeters below the palatal bone crest, and taking into account the palatal soft tissue, it will be a total of 4 millimeters below the outer, peripheral, and external surface.